I hated every single character in here, especially the man. Why don't you go ahead and look that up and things will make a lot of sense. Ever since 2016, a lot has happened. I have not only graduated grammar school, I have now also graduated from college and I now have a bachelor title. So suddenly I read this and I was perfectly capable of understanding the plot line. Wouldn't you know what education can be for? After I finished the series, obviously my life was devoid of any meaning. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my July reading wrap-up. I know I'm a little bit late with this, but you know what they say, better late than never. I have read/listened to a lot of book stories this month, so let's get right into it. If you watched my June reading wrap-up, you know that at the end of June/at the beginning of July, I reread the Harry Potter series for the first time in over 10 years. In June, I still managed to read parts 1, 2, and 3, so obviously I started off July by reading books 4, 5, 6, and 7. If I counted the pages I read in a month, I think this month would have to be like my all-time high, because the first 4 books alone that I read this month obviously have insanely many pages. So we started off, of course, with Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, then moved on to Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. By the way, I believe Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix to this day remains the thickest book I have ever read. This version of it has 800 pages, but I remember the version of the book 10 years ago had over 1,000 pages, and that's the only book I ever read that was over 1,000 pages. So some of you all out there are reading Anna Karenina and stuff like that. I read Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, okay? Also, I got this in the house editions, and I got it, as you can tell, in the Ravenclaw edition. I don't think I've ever actually taken this Pottermore test that sorts you into one of the houses, but I am self-identifying as a Ravenclaw for sure, so I decided to get the Ravenclaw one. Also, I really like the color and stuff. Anyway, after that, obviously, we have Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, and finishing off the saga with Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. After I finished the series, obviously, my life was devoid of any meaning. I was like, what do I do now, honestly? So to kind of prolong my dwelling in this beautiful world of Harry Potter, after I finished with Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, I decided to read, also like for the first time since it came out, the screenplay of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, the Broadway production that I have sadly never seen, like as a theater play actually, but back when this came out, I think like in 2016, I read this, but actually I didn't really remember any of the plot, to be honest, but I only remembered that back then when I first read it, I was kind of like confused. I know there was like a lot of, well, time turning, so traveling between past and present and stuff changing, and it got very confusing. At least the first time when I read it, I was kind of confused, to be honest, so I didn't overly like it, if I'm being honest. But ever since 2016, a lot has happened. I have not only graduated grammar school, I have now also graduated from college, and I now have a bachelor title. So suddenly I read this and I was perfectly capable of understanding the plot line. Wouldn't you know what education can be for? Anyway, so I read this. I actually had a very good time. I didn't expect it, as I said, because I kind of remembered it badly from the first time when I read it. And now after I finished with this, I'm so keen on watching that production now. But you gotta be aware, this is not your ordinary theater play. They say, bitch, you're gonna have to block off an entire day to watch this masterpiece, okay? Because this is, as you can tell, it's separated into parts 1 and parts 2. And I believe it works like that. During the matinee, so in the afternoon time of the day, they show part 1. And I believe they will probably already like separate part 1 into like 2 parts and have like an intermission in between. And then in the evening, they show part 2. So you can only like book tickets for the same day. It's not like you can say, okay, Monday, we're gonna watch part 1 in the matinee, and then like on Friday we're gonna see part 2 in the evening to kind of like spread it out. No, you can only get tickets for part 1 and part 2 on the same day. In other words, you really have to block off an entire day to see it. And I don't know, we've never done that, even though it's been in theater now since I believe 2016. So I've had plenty of chance to go and see it, but I don't know, I never did it. Now I'm really keen on going there, but now I will probably not make it to London anytime soon. I know they also show it probably on Broadway in New York. I know it's in Hamburg as well, but yeah, I don't think I'm gonna make it to any of these places. Not anytime soon, but I definitely want to see this. It must be a fantastical production. But folks, we're here to talk about books, not theater. So, what did I read after I finished my time in the Harry Potter universe? I actually already started reading this while I was still reading Harry Potter, but then I only got to finish it once I was entirely done with everything. I read Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, a fantastic dystopian novel. It's definitely a classic of its genre. This book takes place in a totalitarian version of the United States, more specifically the eastern coast, New England states or something like that. And in this totalitarian society, the few fertile women that still exist are forced to live as handmaids to the commanders of the society, which basically makes them their property, and they have to bear their children. And we follow one of these handmaids called Offred, and by following her everyday life, we learn more and more about how the society is constructed, how this system, this totalitarian system works. We also learn about like her past life, her life before the world turned into this totalitarian society. And we learned how things came to be, etc. It's insanely fascinating. It's been such a long time since I read a dystopian book, so I wasn't used to the genre anymore, I guess. So it was so fascinating to, well, page by page, learn more about this world, this setting, this totalitarian society, the insane strict rules and punishments, etc., that are being enforced in this world. It was honestly a gripping read. I can only recommend this like this, and 1984 are the two dystopias to go for, I believe. My gosh, it's getting hot. Today it's actually way colder than yesterday, so I put on this like cropped turtleneck, but now I'm sweating. Anyway, after The Handmaid's Tale, I read one of my new favorite books of all time, of this year for sure. I read Elektra by Jennifer Saint. And dudes, let me tell you, I love this book. So, as you can tell by the title, by the cover, this is another one of these ancient Greek myth retellings that are very popular right now because of Madeline Miller and her Song of Achilles and Circe. Jennifer Saint is the other author that does retellings like that. I know she has published a book before this called Ariadne. I have not yet read that, but it is on my TBR shelf and I hope to be getting to it soon. But I read Elektra first, and my gosh, I love this. So this is again centered around the trope of the Trojan War, which you are familiar with if you have read Song of Achilles, but it is focusing on the perspective of three women. Those are Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra is the wife of Agamemnon, who is like the king, the chief commander who led the Greeks into the war against the Trojans. The second perspective is obviously Electra's. Elektra is one of Clytemnestra's and Agamemnon's daughters. And the third perspective is Cassandra's, who is a Trojan princess. So she's on the other side of the Greeks and the Trojans. This book tells the story of love, motherly love, grief, revenge, bloodlust, vengeance. It was such a gripping read. I don't think I'm spoiling anything by explaining at least like the premise of the book. So what pretty much sets off the plot for this book is that Clytemnestra and Agamemnon, they have another daughter called Iphigenia. That's their oldest daughter. And when Agamemnon and all the Greeks want to go into war against the Trojans, the gods request a sacrifice, and the sacrifice is that Agamemnon is supposed to kill his firstborn daughter. So he lures Iphigenia and Clytemnestra to where the army is stationed, where they hope to like be sailing off towards Troy soon, and he kills his own daughter in front of his wife's eyes without hesitation. He just slits her throat, lets her die, so that he can go into war with the Greeks against the Trojans. This event sets off the entire story because Clytemnestra is ravaged with grief and with bloodlust. She wants to take revenge on Agamemnon for killing her firstborn child. This is kind of like the premise of the book. We witness Clytemnestra waiting patiently back at home, waiting for Agamemnon to come back from the war so she can take revenge on him. Who's also back at home though is Elektra, her other daughter, and she is devoted to her father, even though she hasn't really like spent a lot of time with him because she was still quite young when he set off to war, but she's devoted to him in not an entirely normal way. I'm sure you have heard maybe of the Oedipus complex, even if you're maybe not familiar with this specific term. If you're look up what it is. I'm sure you have heard of the concept. Now, there's another name for the Oedipus complex, kind of like the equivalent for it. Why don't you go ahead and look that up, and things will make a lot of sense. Let's just say it like that. Then, as I just said, we also have this other perspective of Cassandra, a Trojan princess who has been cursed by Apollo the god, who's reporting kind of like out of the other perspective. She's in Troy once it lays in siege against the Greeks, etc., etc. I really, really love this book. Out of the Greek retellings that I have read, and I have read The Song of Achilles, Circe, and now this was by far my favorite. I really, really love this. I really hope I'm gonna like Ariadne as much as this. Have you read Ariadne and this? Can you kind of give me like a comparison, which one you liked better, which one you thought was better executed, etc.? Because I really want to read Ariadne now, but I'm kind of scared that I'm not gonna like it as much as Elektra, because I really, really love this. So that was that. After that, I started to read a book that I don't actually have with me anymore because I gave it away after not even finishing it. I decided to give the Dune series another try. I actually started reading the 4th part, Dune, God's Emperor, but as I just said, I do not actually have it with me anymore because I made it up to the halfway point. I read/listened to exactly half of the book, but I just couldn't get into it, and then I decided that I need not force myself to finish this book. I can just let it go. Now, if you know my history with like the entire Dune series, is I really liked parts 1 and 2 that are strongly connected to one another anyway. I really despised part 3, and now I felt, I guess, just like pretty indifferent about part 4, so indifferent that I didn't even want to finish it. I guess that kind of settles the fact that I'm now like really done with the Dune series. I really don't think I'm going to continue in any way, shape or form. I'm not advising you against ever reading it, but I think like parts 1 and 2 are a lot of fun, but what follows like in the series, at least the parts that I have read, is like a completely different game almost. Like parts 1 and 2 are still so connected. We have Paul Atreides, played by Timothée Chalamet in the movies, as our main protagonist. I believe in the first 2 books, they are more gripping because there's like a certain storyline, there are certain motivations. We kind of know what is going on. Like he has to take over like the position of the Duke after his father is killed, and he is believed to be this messiah by the Fremen, blah blah blah. So like there's a specific storyline that we follow because we want to know, oh, is he this messiah? What is going on? But then in books 3 and 4, not only are they completely different protagonists because they're also insane time jumps. I think in book 3 we are like 30 or something years in the future, but now in book 4 we're like 3,000, yes, you had that right, years into the future. So in that aspect alone, like books 1, 2, 3 and 4, like they have nothing to do with one another. Paul Atreides, he is still very, very, very vaguely present in book 3. He's not present anymore in book 4. So, I don't know, if you're interested, if you maybe watch the movie and you're like, oh yeah, that was a dope story about Paul Atreides, etc., you might enjoy books 1 and 2, but I can definitely not vouch for you like your books 3 or 4 because they're like taking place in the same universe, I guess, but they're completely different protagonists, completely different storylines, especially with book 4 now. I guess I couldn't get into it because it was so impossible to even like see where any of this could possibly be going, I think, because the dimensions of this book are just so vast. Not only is it like 3,000 years since everything else happened that we know, but also the protagonist, so to say, of book 4 is a more or less supernatural being whose dimensions, also like talking in years, are just like uncomparable to anything we know. As to the plot of the 4th book, I was just like, okay, where's this even going? Does this even like have a storyline per se? We did have like this aspect of some rebellions are being formed against the god emperor, but he's like pretty much immortal and they're not gonna be able to do anything anyway. So like, where's this book even going? I did not know, and after half of it, I was still not really curious to find out, so I decided to give it up. There you go. After Dune, God's Emperor, I read We Have Always Lived in a Castle by Shelley Jackson. This is the second Shelley Jackson I have ever picked up. I read Hill House, The Haunting of Hill House, I think back in October, November, something around that time. And I did not really know anything about this book when I headed into it. I was wondering if it, similar to The Haunting of Hill House, is kind of like a spooky, horror-y, paranormal story. It is not that, I think. Our main protagonist in this book is a bit different maybe from like your average normal day protagonist, I'd say, but not in a like she's psychotic, she's a serial killer, she's whatever kind of vibe, but she's just a little different, a little unique. I can't really explain the way in which she is unique. I think it's hard to explain that. And this is basically about this special girl living together with her sister in this house that used to be their family home, but all other family members are basically dead. They're only also living together with one, I don't think he's like their direct uncle, but like kind of like a distant uncle. And these three are kind of happily, peacefully living together in this old family house. But then a different person basically enters their life. And our main protagonist has exactly no interest in letting anyone else into their sacred home, into their sacred routine, and therefore is willing to do a lot of things to get rid of this intruder again. That's basically the story. It was a very quick read. I really enjoyed it. And at the end of the day, I thought that this was, I don't think this is the message you're supposed to be taking away from this book, but to me, in the end, it was actually a like sweet tale of sisterly love, because I really liked the relationship, the connection between our protagonist and her older sister. I think that's the best way maybe I can describe this book. A very sweet and very unique loving sister relationship. The things they're willing to do for one another to preserve their life, the happiness that they have had so far. That's, to me, we have always lived in a castle. Okay, sorry guys, I had to put my hair because it's just getting too hot in here. And I don't want to do a striptease on camera, so this is gonna have to do. The next book I read, I do not have a physical copy of it with me right now because this is actually the first, not the first, well, is it maybe? The first ebook I ever read. I'm gonna talk about it more in maybe like next week's video or something like that, but I have to make the switch to ebooks now because I will be moving, I will get into that, but so this is the first ebook I ever read maybe. I don't think I ever read an entire book online before, like on a screen. I read The Maid. I heard about it a lot because I believe a couple of months ago it was a book of the month pick and it sounded kind of fun, so I gave it a go. But to be really honest, I was kind of disappointed or like not disappointed even, but it's really not that great a read. So basically, The Maid is, I guess, at least supposed to be somewhat of a murder mystery. Our main protagonist, whose name I have forgotten, it doesn't matter, she works as a maid. What else you have to know about her is that she is somewhere on the neurodivergent scale. She is somewhere on the autism scale, I would want to say. She grew up in very like special circumstances, so she herself is kind of special and she doesn't perceive the world as other people, normal people, perceive it, and she especially struggles with interpreting facial expressions, for example, or like tones of the voice or like situations in general. So yeah, that's her. One day at work, she discovers a dead body. But here's the thing, now you might be like, okay, so then she's gonna start investigating what happened there, who killed him. But that's basically not what happens. For the first half of the book, she's not trying to investigate this murder case or anything like that. What happens in the first half of the book is that the people around her are horribly taking advantage of her, but she doesn't realize what is going on in these situations. She's not correctly interpreting what other people are saying to her, what other people are making her do. So the people that she believes are her friends, well, yeah, they play her real bad. And as I just said, basically get her to be suspected of being the killer of this man that she found in the hotel suite. So then at the halfway point of this book, she is convicted for being the murderess, and only then the really good people in her life actually pop up and they help her out, and then they actually try to figure out what really happened to this man who turned up dead, so they can prove that it wasn't her that killed him but someone else. And then she also finally realizes how she has been played by these other people in her life, and then justice ensues basically, or like at least it has been pulled through by the end of the book. That's this book basically, but I'm just gonna be honest, for the most part it was kind of lackluster. I would not go so far as calling it like a bad book. It's not bad objectively, but it was just kind of lackluster, kind of boring. The murder case in itself wasn't really interesting. the people in themselves were not really that interesting. Of course, the first half of the book is also somewhat frustrating to read because we can easily see how our main protagonist is being played by these other people in her life, how they're taking advantage of her, and how she's heading into being suspected to be a murderer by doing the things she does for them. And so, of course, you're sitting there reading it, you're just like, girl, don't do all of that, don't trust them. But then she still does. But at least then by the second half of the book, she realizes that these are bad people, that they are playing her, etc. But at least for the first part of the book, that's kind of frustrating. So yeah, overall, like I don't give any of the books really star ratings or anything like that. But if I had to give this book a star rating out of like 5 stars, I think I would only give it like a 2-star because it was just not something special, I believe, in any way, shape, or form. Sorry. Now let's head into the audiobooks I listened to this month. As I just kind of like explained, I don't only have to make the switch from physical books to ebooks, but because I downloaded this app that will kind of like provide me with ebooks because it's like linked up to my library cards, I can make another video about all of that. I now for the first time ever also have access to ebooks. Like, to me, reading a book, be that physically or like as an ebook, and listening to a book in the shape of an audiobook, these are just like 2 very different things to me, 2 very different actions, 2 very different ways of consuming a story. And I'm like, usually I definitely always go into the, well, reading a book myself category. But I found out that, especially with stories that I am not sure if I'm gonna like them, I have heard about these books, but I was never fully convinced if I want to pick them up myself. For these kind of books, it is now perfect for me to just pick up the audiobook, listen to them on, I don't know, 1.5, 2 times speed while doing something else, while cooking, eating, doodling, making my bullet journal, working out, something like that. Because that way I neither have to, well, buy the physical copy, spend the money on the book that I'm not even sure I really want to read. And also I'm not committing that much time to it, because when you're physically, or like also as an ebook, when you're like actually reading a book, you can't really multitask that with any other activity. But when you're listening to something, there are so many other things that you can do at the same time, so it feels less like a time commitment as well. So I figured this method out, that with stories that, as I just said, they were on and off of my TBR, like for some time. I thought about reading them, then I put them off again, then I thought about them again, then I put them off again. I am now just gonna pick up the audiobooks if they're available and give them a go. And then if I really like it, I'm also going to pick up the actual book and read it too. And if I wasn't too crazy about it, I'm just happy with having listened to the audiobook and not having actually read the book. So I did it like that, and I listened to 3 full audiobooks and kind of like started another one. And the first one was actually a full-on success because I liked it so much that I ended up getting the physical book as well, because now I also want to read it. The book I'm talking about, I already talked about this extensively in my last video. The Love Hypothesis. I would have never thought that I would like this book. For the longest time, I didn't even pick it up because I thought like, nah, that's not gonna be for me. But then I listened to the audiobook because it was available, and hell, I kind of really loved it. I'm gushing about it enough in this other video of mine, so if you want to hear my in-depth thoughts on the Love Hypothesis, check out this other video. But basically, I don't even think I have to tell you about the plot. This started off as a Reylo, which is like a Star Wars character, fan fiction. This is a fake dating to real life dating romance about PhD student Olive, who starts fake dating one of her professors because of pretty stupid reasons, but we're just gonna ignore that. But then she and also he develop actual feelings for one another, and so the story continues. I really had an excellent time with this one, so now in the next couple of, I don't know, weeks, months, I also want to read it as a physical book. But that was the first audiobook I listened to. The second one was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. And my feelings on this are almost hard to describe because, again, I would not say that this is a bad book. I'm not saying that this is badly written, but I still almost hated like listening to it, because you have to understand, every single character in this book is absolutely despicable, especially the men in it are absolute scum, absolutely disgusting. It makes you lose faith, especially the male side of humanity, but also kind of like in humanity in general, because even though the women the women characters, the female characters in this book, they are better than the male ones, and we sympathize with them because they are often like the victims of certain things that these men have done. I also didn't really like any of the women themselves, so there was literally not a single character in this book that I liked, and of course that doesn't make a read, or in this case a listen, enjoyable if there's like literally no one you like. So basically this is a thriller. I haven't said that yet, I'm sorry. This is a thriller, and it has a very Agatha Christie-esque setting, as it's taking place on a secluded island. A wedding party's taking place there, and over the course of the book we learn about the dirty little secrets, the past, like traumas and backgrounds of each of these characters, how these are interconnected, and so on and so forth. And then everything culminates in someone getting killed, and that's basically the book. But as I just said, I hated every single character in here, especially the man. Like, after I was done with this book, I just thought, like, I don't think I ever want to see a man again in my entire life. Are you a man watching this? How dare you? Honestly, just how dare you? So that was Lucy Foley's The Guest List. Now, I don't know if someone out there will say something like, well, you're not supposed to like the characters. That's something that a lot of like defenders of Normal People by Sally Rooney often say when people like complain or just like state their opinion, like, I didn't like either of them, so I didn't really like the book, etc. They always go like, well, you're not supposed to like them. And then I'm like, okay, great. I guess you can applaud the author for being like, yeah, you definitely accomplished your mission, because I really actually did not like a single person in this book. But even if that was the author's intention, it still didn't make it more enjoyable for me personally to read the story, to listen to the story, to consume the story, because I did not like a single character in the book. You know what I'm saying? At least for me personally, like, I want to like the people in my books, and it doesn't have to do with them being morally good or bad or grey or whatever. I'm not just saying like I only like morally good protagonists, so I hated everyone here. These were just like all such shit human beings. So that was that. I don't know. I am gonna give Lucy Foley another try. I am currently waiting for the copy of the book of The Apartment, or like The Paris Apartment, to come in. I think it's gonna be available to me in like 2 to 3 weeks, so I'm gonna read that. I'm curious to find out if like the characters in that book are kind of similar. Like, is that her thing? Is that her vibe, having very unlikable characters in her books? I don't know. I'm gonna find out by reading this other book by her, but that was Lucy Foley's The Guest List. And then last but not least, the last audiobook I fully listened to was The Inheritance Games Part 2. Now, I read the first book of the series back in, I think, March 2021. That was in the first video I ever posted in my March 2021 reading wrap-up. And I actually kind of liked it. This is like a YA story, and it's about this average 17-year-old girl who suddenly becomes heir to this literal billionaire, and everyone is like, what? Who is this guy? Why is he leaving me all his billions? And she has to live in his house, who has all these secret passageways and puzzles, and there are these 2 other grandsons in her age, and they're super cute, and she likes them and they like her. Yeah, and then they're like puzzle solving left and right in that book. But like the puzzle solving component I really liked. I like that kind of stuff. But this love triangle between her and the 2 hot grandsons that are into her and she's into them, that's at least like 50% of the story. So like this puzzle solving and this love triangle is like 50-50 within the first book. And this love triangle taking up 50% of the book, that was just like too much for me, because I was really not interested in that at all. Also, what a ridiculous setup. Like, everyone in his family is so good looking and they're all so rich and they all love her, of course. I don't know. It's just like, like, what kind of setup is this? Honestly. So that's why I kind of liked the book, but I really didn't like how big a part this love triangle played in the book. So when the second book dropped, I didn't pick it up because I wasn't so sure if I still wanted to continue with the story. Plus, I actually heard from reviews by especially like Carrie and I believe Cindy that nothing happens in the second book. And now that I have listened to the audiobook, I can confirm that statement. Nothing happens in the second book. So basically in the first book, she's kind of like getting jiggy with one of the grandsons, and now in the second book she's kind of getting jiggy with the other one of the grandsons. So That's something that happens in the second book, but like plot mystery wise, one of the big things that happens at the end of the first book, if I remember correctly, is that they do like a DNA test on her, because everyone's trying to figure out why did this billionaire leave all of his money to the seemingly complete stranger. So by the end of the first book, it's like, oh, okay, but like you're really not blood related, so like we still can't explain really anything. Well, in the second book, everyone goes like, wait, let's go back on that one. And basically for the entirety of the second book, our main protagonist, she's actually convinced that she is related to all of them after all, only for the plot twist at the end of the second book to be like, wait, no, she's actually really, really not related to them. So if you look at it, the like status quo at the end of the second and at the end of the first book is exactly the same. That they have figured out that she is not related to any of them. So yeah, I don't know, as in plot, the second book is really quite useless, I believe. I mean, sure, some other things get revealed, etc., but that's like the biggest thing that you're trying to figure out for the entirety of the second book. Wait, is she now like actually or actually not related to them? Never minding all the stuff they did in the first part, basically. I don't know, it was kind of like, again, kind of like lackluster, because I listened to it on like 2x speed while I did other stuff. I was fine with listening to it, but I would have definitely not read the book, let's just say it like that. I believe the third and final part of the series is getting released this month, I actually think, like August 2022. So I think if it's gonna be available to me on audiobook, I might pick it up. But if it's only gonna be available on this app as a book, I don't think I'm gonna pick it up. I'm really not that interested, because especially like obviously also like in the second book, this whole love triangle thing, it played such a huge role, and it's probably gonna continue into the third book, and I'm really not interested in that part. So there you go. And now just like last but not least, a very short comment on one last audiobook that I started to listen to, but then after having listened to like the first 10%, I stopped because I just couldn't get into the story. That was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I had heard a lot about this book, and I kept going back and forth whether I want to read it or not. It was on my TBR list, and I scratched it off again, and so on and so forth. But now I saw that I could just give the audiobook a go. But yeah, to be really honest, I just couldn't get into it after the first 10%. I stopped listening to it, and I don't think I'm ever gonna pick it up again. What I could gather from the plot from the first 10% is basically that the main protagonist, a girl in like high school or something, she's reinvestigating this famous murder case that took place in her, I think it's like quite a small town, 5 or something years ago. Back then they thought they solved it. Everyone in the town thinks they know what happened back then, who the murderer was, etc. But she's convinced that things were not what they seemed back then, and so she's like reinvestigating all of this. But I didn't really get any further into the plot or like into actual details of this murder case. I didn't click with it, so I stopped listening to it. Okay, so these, oh my god, were all the books I read in July. Some more stories that I listened to. I hope you liked this. I hope you found something for you in here. Definitely let me know about the Elektra Ariadne comparison if you have read both books. I'm gonna see you in the next one. Bye!